Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following: IU Health Southern Indiana physicians, primary care and specialty care providers now accepting new patients in Bloomington and throughout South Central Indiana. siphysicians.org, IU Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, working to improve cybersecurity and provide policy guidance through partnerships with industry, government, and academia.
Smithville Fiber, the Gigacity Company, fiber internet, HD, and digital IPTV in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com.
And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk, the country's focus is on Indiana. Hoosiers could play a major role in selecting the country's next president, and all of the candidates were in the state this week making a final appeal to voters.
Democrats can and probably will vote in the Republican presidential primary.
How the interest in the presidential race could impact other issues on the Hoosier ballot. Plus, we continue our coverage a year after the HIV outbreak in Scott County. The area was the first in the state to get a needle exchange.
They need rehabilitation. If you give a person a needle in exchange for them to use the drug, again, it's never going to end.
It's that time of year again in Indiana, morel mushroom hunting season. We separate fact from fiction and give you some ideas for other edible things you could hunt if you have no luck finding any mushrooms. Those stories, plus the latest news headlines, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. All eyes are on the Indiana primary with just 4 days away. Presidential candidates are aggressively campaigning throughout the state, trying to win over voters. This is one of the rare years when Indiana could have a large impact on shaping the presidential election. The excitement in Indiana is at its height ahead of Tuesday's primary election. There's a lot on the line for the presidential candidates visiting the state this week, especially Republicans. Ted Cruz is focused on what he sees as a head-to-head fight with Donald Trump. Cruz and candidate John Kasich are working together in a coordinated effort to try and defeat Trump, with Cruz making multiple stops throughout the state this week. To try and boost his chances, Cruz announced Carly Fiorina as his pick for vice president at a rally in Indianapolis.
She knows firsthand that the key to economic growth is not government and more government. It is rather less and less government.
Donald Trump barely mentioned Cruz's pick during his visit to Indy the same day. He stood alongside legendary IU basketball coach Bobby Knight, who called Trump the most prepared man to become president.
You folks have a great opportunity here. You folks voting for Donald Trump and throwing him over the top.
If we win Indiana, it's over. It's over. And I can only promise you, it's over.
For Republicans, Indiana is the second largest state left among the remaining primaries. Trump, even as the runaway frontrunner, still needs about 502 of the remaining delegates to accrue a majority. With Indiana as a winner-take-most state, Trump needs to win the state to stay on pace to win the majority. Because Indiana is an open primary state, registered voters can vote for either party, which could benefit Trump.
People who are identify themselves as Democrats can and probably will vote in the Republican presidential primary. We know, for example, that Donald Trump has been drawing a fair number of Democrats in Republican primaries.
Hillary Clinton focused her efforts this week on northern Indiana with a strong emphasis on middle-class jobs and wages. She said revitalizing the manufacturing sector, an important industry in Indiana, is crucial.
I have a plan to invest $10 billion to bring unions, workers, businesses, universities, and the government together to create new manufacturing jobs.
Clinton's husband and former President Bill Clinton also campaigned on her behalf in Indianapolis. Opponent Bernie Sanders drew a large crowd during a stop on Indiana University's campus. It was an ideal setting for him to lay out what he calls the most progressive agenda in U.S. history. His platform includes free college tuition financed by taxes on Wall Street, universal health care, and a $15 an hour minimum wage. He says in Indiana, the top 1% is getting richer at the expense of other Hoosiers.
Here in the state of Indiana, for example, since 2007, real median income has gone down by more than $4,700.
Indiana could be Sanders' last stand. He's counting on large turnout from college students. A precarious situation to be in, Lankowski says, because they vote at lower rates than any other age group.
So the question is whether or not those college students who are feeling the burn will be more concerned to avoid bad grades than to go out and vote for somebody who by that time will be pretty close to out of the race.
Sanders acknowledged that if he doesn't win Indiana, he'll still try to win every delegate he can before the Democratic National Convention. His campaign said Thursday Sanders was steering much of his remaining effort to California's primary in June.
And a win in Indiana is also critical for Cruz. Trump swept 5 East Coast states this week, so Cruz needs to win Indiana to keep his hopes of a contested convention alive. And that's where we'll ask Ted Carmines to join the conversation. Carmines is a political scientist at Indiana University. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, great to be here.
Crazy week, huh?
Oh, absolutely crazy, especially in Indiana, where we're not used to this attention this late in the campaign. So.
Well, and Cruz has been all over Indiana for more than a week now, although in a lot of the polls we see Trump ahead. Mathematically, what happens if Cruz doesn't win in Indiana?
Well, it makes it very difficult for them to keep Trump from getting a first ballot nomination. It's really crucial for Cruz to win the state. Trump has got a lot of momentum from the victories he had on Tuesday, and if he wins this state, it's very likely that he'll go on and get the nomination. If Cruz were to win, then there's still some possibility that not that he could get the nomination on the first ballot, but that he could prevent Trump from getting the nomination on the first ballot.
Well, and Cruz announced Carly Fiorina as his VP this week in Indianapolis. Now, is there any Indiana motivation behind that pick?
I don't think it has a lot to do with Indiana. I really think perhaps it will help him if he's still viable for California, where she's from, even though her electoral past there has not been that bright, but I still think it might help a bit there. She's much better known there, but I think it'll have a quite minimal effect here.
And just this afternoon, Governor Pence just endorsed Cruz. How will that affect voters?
Well, that's hard to say, but it should help in the Republican primary. Really, Cruz needs everything to go well for him to win this state, and maybe that'll add a little to his margin.
And then on the Democrat side, Bernie Sanders holding an event in South Bend on Sunday. How important would a win in Indiana be for him?
Well, it'd be extremely important. I mean, he's really hanging by a thread, and he needs lots of victories here, big victories, to catch Hillary Clinton. And so Indiana is really quite crucial to him.
And of course, Clinton currently holds more of the delegates, but Indiana would be huge for her too.
Oh yes, if she were to win Indiana, it's not as crucial on the Democratic side as the Republican side, but still, that would create a lot of added momentum for her and put her in a very strong position for these last few contests.
We'll find out all about it on Tuesday. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now for headlines, we go over to Barbara Brosier, who has the latest on this week's top stories.
Thanks, Joe. Indiana's high absentee voter turnout may signal a large primary turnout on May 3rd. Indiana voters have submitted around 119,000 absentee requests so far. 2008 set the standard for Indiana voter turnout, with around 185,000 Hoosiers voting absentee in the primary. In the 2012 presidential primary, however, only 119,000 absentee ballots were cast. General turnout also took a downturn. Some places, like Floyd County, have experienced as much as a 450% increase in absentee turnout over the same time in 2012. The Bureau of Motor Vehicles is extending its hours to accommodate Hoosiers who need a state ID in order to vote. All branches in Indiana will be open from 8:30 to 8 on Monday and from 6 to 6 on Election Day. A government-issued photo ID is required to vote. You also must have been registered to vote before the April 4th deadline to cast a ballot in the primary. Bartholomew County leaders continue to hash out changes to confined animal feeding operation regulations to make them stricter than some neighboring counties. Indiana CAFO Watch and the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project organized a talk this week in Columbus. Most of the residents who came out expressed concerns about odor and water quality. Bartholomew County commissioners will take a final vote on the proposals next month. Indiana has the 5th largest pig farming industry in the country, but some of the 8.5 million hogs it turns out every year aren't the right size or condition for speedy harvesting. Now, the state's market for reselling those leftover pigs to specialty food makers is growing. Nebraska's Wickman Pig Company just opened its first Indiana location in Delphi. Until now, there were only 2 resale companies left in Indiana, and the market had consolidated as farms did too. Wickman management says they felt there was room for more competition. The panel that will decide the future of standardized testing in Indiana is now complete. The final members of the panel were appointed this afternoon. Under state law, the current I-STEP must end after the 2016-2017 school year. The 23-member panel will meet this summer and fall. They're expected to submit recommendations to the governor by December 1st. People pushing for a historic Paoli Bridge to be rebuilt after a semi caused it to collapse in December may have the law on their side. The Federal Highway Administration recently sent the Orange County Commissioners a letter saying the bridge on South Gospel Street must be restored because it's on the National Register of Historic Places. The trucking company's insurance wanted to build a new bridge because it's cheaper. Repairs are expected to cost at least $1 million. Blooming Foods Co-op is closing its Elm Heights location in May as part of a larger consolidation plan. The decision was based on financial reasons. The Bloomington Co-op will also move its kitchen operations to other stores. Approximately 50 people work at the affected locations. The co-op says they hope to avoid layoffs, but there's no guarantee. 2 Indiana fire stations are home to the country's first safe haven baby boxes. The boxes act as incubators to protect newborns abandoned under the state's safe haven law. State law allows parents to give their children up anonymously and without consequence at fire stations, police departments, and hospitals. In addition to being heated, the boxes contain a motion sensor that triggers a 911 call when opened. It's an exhibit that is 200 years in the making. As J.D. Gray reports, Indiana in 200 Objects goes to great lengths to change how we think of Hoosier history.
The Indiana in 200 Objects exhibit showcases artifacts from the past 2 centuries and well beyond. You can see James Dean's leather jacket, a meteorite that is over 1 billion years old, and an aircraft engine from Rolls-Royce.
Really, this exhibition is about understanding how we got to where we are now and where we're going, and you can't pretend that there weren't things that happened that were less than pleasant.
The exhibit includes darker moments from the state's history as well as the good times. Objects highlight Indiana's rich artistic heritage as well as the state's natural history. The exhibit is a celebration of all aspects of Hoosier life. Every item has a story behind it, like this helmet that provides air to firefighters for up to an hour. When it was invented by a man from Indianapolis, it was a large step forward for firefighters. Or the Coca-Cola bottle that was designed in Terre Haute but quickly became recognizable throughout the country. As the curators created an extensive list, themes began to emerge.
I think throughout the exhibition we tried to mix things from different time periods. We tried to mix natural and cultural objects. It's just, I think, really trying to get people to to see things in a little bit different light.
Many of the objects were already in the Indiana State Museum's collection, but others came from outside collections like corporations, universities, and the U.S. National Archives. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm J.D. Gray.
Next month, the museum will celebrate with the Bicentennial Expo. The two-day event will feature music, theatrical performances, and exhibits. And Joe, there's a lot that you could learn just from going to that exhibit and looking at all of those objects.
Gotta go check it out. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Barbara. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Scott County established the state's first needle exchange. It's up for renewal. County officials hope to see it continue, but residents aren't so sure it isn't doing more harm than good. And we'll talk with Earth Eats host Annie Corrigan about morel mushrooms. She's been talking with foragers all week, and she'll update us on the year in mushroom hunting. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
I can change the world with my own two hands, make it a better place with my own two hands. I'm gonna make it a brighter place with my own two hands. I'm gonna help the human race with my own two hands. I can hold you in my own two hands, and I can comfort you with my own two hands, with my own two hands.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Scott County is asking the state for permission to continue its syringe exchange program for a second year. The exchange became the first of its kind in Indiana following the HIV outbreak in Scott County. Reporter Barbara Brosier joins us now with more. Barbara, what does the county have to do to keep that program going?
Well, Joe, this is uncharted territory since syringe exchanges have only been legal in Indiana for about a year now. Now, as part of the bill legislators passed to make that happen, counties must provide the State Department of Health with annual updates about their programs. That includes information about the number of people using the exchange and the number of needles passed out and turned back in. Scott County leaders want to continue their exchange because they say it's helping slow the spread of HIV. But much of the community remains divided over the program's effectiveness. When you drive through the neighborhood at the center of Indiana's HIV outbreak, there's something that jumps out at you. House after house, block after block, there are dozens of no trespassing signs posted in people's front yards. Some residents even have their driveways roped off.
I make my stand out here sometimes, run some off. The neighbors are trying to clean it up a bit.
We knocked on a lot of doors here, wanted to talk to people living in Austin about how things are going. More than 190 people in Scott County are living with HIV, an outbreak sparked by drug users sharing needles. We talked to several people who are unhappy with the needle exchange. They say they're still finding used needles in their yards and on public property. That's one of the reasons you see all of those no trespassing signs around here. Some think the exchange enables the users and contributes to the problem. But we also spoke to a couple of people who are hooked on the prescription painkiller Opana. They call the needle exchange a lifesaver, one that allows them to save their money for food, transportation, or health care. Austin, in many ways, is a town that remains divided over whether the needle exchange is doing more harm than good. And no one was willing to talk to us on camera about that, out of fear of becoming some sort of a target, except Michael Steele.
I don't feel that the needle exchange is exactly a good thing at all. I think that the state should check into having a rehabilitation center.
That's a sentiment many of his neighbors share. But Scott County's health department says you can't dispute the numbers. Governor Mike Pence declared a public health emergency last March, allowing the county to set up a temporary needle exchange program to help control the HIV outbreak. At the time, there were 79 cases of HIV. By May of last year, the number of cases reached 164, and the outbreak was slowing. Since then, health officials have diagnosed fewer than 30 new HIV cases.
The needle exchange is a vital piece of prevention. The most potent way to prevent the spread of HIV is to treat HIV. If the viral load is undetectable, you can't spread it. That patient has come out of that group of people that can spread HIV. But we know that there's still a large percentage that are not in treatment for whatever reason. And how do we prevent them from spreading HIV to others?
But at a recent meeting of the Scott County Commissioners, health officials said the community needs to look beyond prevention and think about the long-term implications of the outbreak. Treatment remains difficult for many of the people hooked on Opana, but there are more resources in Austin as a result of the outbreak. LifeSpring Health Systems now has an office across the hall from the county's needle exchange program.
We provide behavioral health treatment, so we've got everything from individual therapy to group therapy, as well as psychiatric services and case management services.
The state recently awarded LifeSpring a grant to help expand its detoxification services, which includes medically assisted treatment. But need doesn't always translate to demand. Many people here can't afford to go to an inpatient facility for treatment, which requires them to leave their homes, jobs, and their families for at least 30 days. And the wait to get into those facilities is worse than it was this time last year, when Scott County residents were bumped to the top of the list because of the outbreak.
At the height of the outbreak, we were for Scott County residents, we were looking at anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks. I think the average now is 5 to 6 weeks.
People who do get into those facilities often find themselves in a tough situation once they're released. There's no transitional housing in Austin, and the community lacks the social support many people need to stay clean.
That is the one thing that I wish was going better too. It's a slow process. Everything takes time. And it's, you're like, we're at a year now, and that's still one of the things that we're still really lacking in. And there's things in place that are working to try to help us through that, but it's just such a slow process.
The pace is frustrating for many people in the community who see rehab is the only way to address the ongoing problems here.
Jail is not going to rehabilitate them. They won't get the drugs, but a lot of the times when they get out, they're worse than when they went in.
But IV drug use in Austin has been going on for years, and health officials say it will likely take just as long to correct the problem as it did to create it.
This wasn't something that was created in a very short time. It's not something that's going to be fixed in a really short time, and so what we're doing is taking piece by piece, step by step, trying to do what we can in our little niches, trying to fill the void and gaps where we can.
On average, the Scott County Health Department hands out 20,000 needles per month. Participants are supposed to exchange dirty needles for clean ones, but the health department is handing out more needles than they're receiving in return. The cost of providing those needles is covered by grants.
All right, thank you very much, Barbara. And warmer weather means many Hoosiers are going outdoors and enjoying nature. April is in the heart of morel mushroom season, and foragers have begun to search the forest floors for the edible fungi. Joining us now is Annie Corrigan. She's the host of WFIU's Earth Eats, and you spent the last week speaking with some of these mushroom hunters. Are there any out there? Are there any left to find?
Yes, there are, but here's the thing, Joe. Easy to identify morels, hard to spot them in the woods. It takes practice. So some things to know before you head out. They like damp soil. They like air temperatures in the 60s and 70s. And if you're going out there, look for ash trees and elm trees, especially dead trees. They like them. They like the dead trees. And collect mushrooms in a mesh bag so you can let the spores fall out of the bag, and hopefully you'll have a patch of mushrooms there next season.
So is this a good season compared to others? Because the weather has been rather wet.
All over the place, right? So what I've heard from foragers is that it's been a pretty normal season in that it's been completely unpredictable. Just think about the range of weather conditions we've had this month alone. What I've heard from people is that they're hoping that it's going to extend into early May. Think about the weather that we're getting this weekend. Could lead to some pretty good hunting conditions in the next couple days.
Why is this such a big deal? I never heard of this up in northern Indiana until I moved down here, and it just seems like that's all you hear about now.
I can't speak for people who love it, but why I love it is I love the hunt. I love going out into the woods, taking my time, and maybe hitting the jackpot. Really feels like winning the lottery when you find a patch.
And what about if you do find some, what are some of the ways to prepare them?
Classic is battered and deep fried. I like them with eggs and asparagus and a scramble. But before you cook, you got to clean them. Some people soak them in salt water. Others take a toothbrush to them to get the grit off. But here's another tip. Collect that water that you use to wash the morels. Take it outside, dump it at a base of a tree in your yard. Maybe you'll get a patch pop up next season, a couple seasons down the road. Who knows? Is
there anything else out there to look for if people are out looking for the mushroom?
That's a good question. You will likely be unsuccessful when you hunt for morels several times. So keep your eyes peeled for wild garlic mustard greens. They're an invasive species. They're edible. You can eat them raw or cooked. And you're going to be doing the environment a favor if you harvest them from the root, get the entire root system. They're good for the environment and good for you.
All right, thank you very much, Annie. That was great.
My pleasure.
And that's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following: IU Health Southern Indiana physicians, primary care and specialty care providers now accepting new patients in Bloomington and throughout South Central Indiana. siphysicians.org, IU Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, working to improve cybersecurity and provide policy guidance through partnerships with industry, government, and academia.
Smithville Fiber, the Gigacity Company, fiber internet, HD, and digital IPTV in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com.
And by WTIU members. Thank you.